Hello and welcome to the C++11 Beginner Tutorials by Gamer2Creator. I'm Chris. So now that we've talked about functions, we need to quickly discuss scope. What is scope? Well, every time you create a function, you've put all your code between two curly braces. Most of the time, you can consider this to be your scope. For example, we've created an employee here within this scope. Now, when does this employee get destroyed and the memory freed? Well, that's at the end of the scope that it was declared in. Since it was declared here between these two brackets, this employee will get destroyed at the end of this scope. Now we can use some of our other functions as an example. This employee right here, we've created it in the getEmployeesFromConsole function between these two brackets, so it will get destroyed at the end of this function right here. Now we've returned it. We've returned EMP, which is our employee, but we returned a copy of it because that is what return does. It copies the value of employee. If it didn't do this, we would be returning something that was deleted and freed, and that would be bad. This function here, also the same thing. We created our int, called it myInput. We returned it, which is a copy of it, and then this particular int right here that we created is freed and destroyed. Now I'm going to give some more examples. You can actually make a deeper scope just like this. Just two curly braces. Now this looks weird, and it is kind of weird, and it's not used very often, but it can be used to control the lifetime of a variable that may be using a lot of memory, and you want it to be destroyed when you say you want it to be destroyed. And that would be at the end of the scope. So you can create a scope in order to manage memory. Now, an empty scope like this isn't used very often, but we're going to show you how it can be used. First, we're going to create an int up here. We're going to call it int local int. So this is local to the function in this scope, and we can access it right here. We can print it out to the console, for example. Even though it's above this scope, it's actually created in this scope. So we can access it here. Now we can also, let's print this out real quick. Well, let's get rid of some of this. I'm going to comment. Yeah, forget it. Just don't do it. So since we declared it here in this scope, we can access it here. We can also access variables in a deeper scope. So we can actually count from right here. So now that we know that that local variables to a scope are always available in a deeper scope, but they're not available in a shallower scope. For example, if I created, let's print this out just to prove. We have two zeros printed out. Now if we switch this around and we try to put local int in the deeper scope, this scope, the shallower scope, has no idea what local int is. It is completely oblivious to what this is because it doesn't exist. As the program comes down through its execution, one line at a time, it's going to come here and it's going to go into this scope and create your variable for this scope. And then at the end of this scope, destroys all variables that were created within this scope. So local int is destroyed right here, and as the program continues, local int no longer exists. Excuse me. So this is how you can control the lifetime of a variable, that the memory has been freed as of right here for this variable. We could do an employee here. And still, this line has no idea what it is. Now, usually you won't be doing it like this, but it's important to know that you could. Usually, you're going to be creating scopes like this with an if statement. This creates a scope. If something is true, then it will do the code within this scope. So you could do, you know, employee imp equals get console. And still, this line has no idea what happened within this scope. So the common way to get around this problem, let's say you were trying to make an employee and you had a condition, for example, if get imp from console, let's just say get from console true, and then we'll just pretend like somewhere in the code this gets set. And this is a flag that says, yeah, we want to get this information from the console. So this is our if statement. Else, you know, just do something else. So what we can do here, let's switch this around. We're going to make this an int. Get in from console still makes sense, and then we're going to do int. That way we can count it down here at the bottom. And then actually, here's a good opportunity. Sram time 0. So we're going to get a random number instead. Int equals rand. So we're actually going to make a little bit of an application here. It's a little more than I had planned, but it should be a pretty good example. So we're going to ask the user if he wants to get the integer from the console. Then we input true or false. Then if get from console is true, which means the user inputted true, then we ask again to get input from the console. If get from console is false, then we just get a random integer, and then we print it out. Now we did it like this in order to prove a point, and I'll show you what that point is after we run this. So we're going to put 1, because remember, it wants a Boolean value, either true or false. And that's the same as 0 for false, 1 for true. So we put in 1, and now it's asking us for the int. So we're going to put 1, 2, 3, 4. And now it prints out 1, 2, 3, 4. We can do the opposite now and put in 0. And then it just prints out a random number. Now the reason I did it like this is that I declared my int as a local variable to this scope. So it exists within our if block and scope and our else block and scope, because these are deeper scopes. However, if I was to move this and declare it right here, this my int knows about it, but in our else it has no idea what my int is, and here it has no idea what my int is, because it was destroyed right here. It was created within this scope and destroyed at the end of this scope. So when we move it back, it just works.